the pyramid of power, the top of the pyramid. Guys, if you haven't seen my 17-part documentary series, I want to invite you guys to visit thepyramidofpower.net. We've got a brand new website that's built. It's only working right now for desktop. We're still working on mobile. And I'm on a privacy browser right now, so it's not showing up correctly. But if you go to your browser, I want to encourage you to use a privacy browser. But if you go look at it on a non-privacy browser, there will be an enter button here. And if you click that, you'll see this beautiful 3D pyramid just floating there. And that's basically the menu. You can scroll up the pyramid and click, the first brick all the way up to the 17th one. And that'll allow you to choose the chapter you want to watch. You can also, of course, use our navigation here and watch all 17 episodes of the Pyramid of Power. As I mentioned, we are getting very, very close to releasing the final episode, Chapter 17, Volume 2, which I did watch Draft 1 of last week. It is an hour and 40 minutes long. It features Richard Grove, James Corbett, G. Edward Griffin, Mark Passio, David Icke, Richard Spence, Adam Green, Catherine Austin Fitz. I'm probably missing some. Carrie Wedler. I'm sure I'm missing some. Larkin Rose. I'm sure that I'm still missing some others. But it is the epic conclusion of this documentary series that I've been working on for the last 5 years. And today I wanted to give you a little preview of what you can expect as we talk about who's at the top of the pyramid. If you watched Chapter 17, Volume 1, you know that, which you can find right here, you know that we talked about everything from, let's see in my transcript here, we talked about the deep state. What is the deep state? Where does that term originate from? And who is that? We looked at BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Are they the deep state? We looked at the World Economic Forum. We talked about the Club of Rome. We talked about the Bilderberg Group. We talked about the Trilateral Commission. We talked about, what else did we get into? The roundtable groups, which comes from, of course, the book Tragedy and Hope, written by Carol Quigley, who was Bill Clinton's mentor, and he had access to the Council on Foreign Relations archives. We talk about the roundtable groups and ask, well, who are the roundtable groups? And then we talk about the Committee of 300, which was a name that was claimed to be the top of the pyramid by John Coleman, a researcher back in the 90s who claimed to be former British intelligence. We talk about those claims. And then we ended this episode kind of hinting at where we were going. The final line of the documentary series of part 1 says, John Coleman's theory of a committee of 300 made up of representatives from academia, banking, media, and other industries aligns with the power structure we've discussed. Coleman claims that the final inner circle of the round tables is the Olympians, where all decisions are made and where power truly lies. And while John Coleman disagreed with the belief that the Jews were the top of the pyramid or running the alleged Committee of 300, there are many people who do subscribe to this theory. And that's where we're going to pick things up. We are going to explore the controversial claim that it is the so-called, Jewish Zionists at the top of the pyramid. We're also going to be looking at the Freemasons. We're going to be looking at the Jesuits. And so I previously have done this episode called Dissecting the Top of the Pyramid, Part 1, the Jesuits. You can consider this Dissecting the Top of the Pyramid, Part 2, the Freemasons. That's what we're going to talk about today. And this one will be in the show notes if you want to go back to see what I had to say about the Jesuits, including, I will mention Professor Richard Spence, who is in this final episode. He's a professor emeritus at University of Idaho, and he is, I would say more in the mainstream with a lot of his research, but he is also somebody who has an eye for history, and I think tries to bring some credibility to conspiracy research by doing it in an objective way. And he looks at the way that secret societies and conspiracies have influenced history and wars and geopolitical events. And he does so, I think, with a nuanced approach that doesn't just believe any and every crazy conspiracy theory out there. I will invite you guys to go back and watch my interview with Professor Spence from April of this year, How to Investigate Conspiracies and Secret Societies with Richard Spence. Now, what I'm showing you on screen here, which I've only ever shown in this video here, Dissecting the Top of the Pyramid, this is my script for Chapter 17, Part 2, featuring James Corbett, Catherine Austin Fitz, Adam Green, G. Edward Griffin, Richard Grove, David Icke, Larkin Rose, Richard Spence, and Mark Passio. Comes out to an hour and 45 minutes. As I mentioned, the first part of this series is going to be about the Zionists, the claim about the Jews. We're going to take an honest look at this controversial topic. We're not going to talk about that today. We will in an upcoming video. But that is a good chunk of this final episode. We look at those claims in an honest approach. Then we talk about the Freemasons, which we're going to cover today. And then we talk about the Society of Jesus, aka the Jesuits, which I talked about in this previous video. And then we also go into the Jesuits and the Freemason connection, because these groups have a lot of history together and a rivalry against each other. We talk about the Illuminati. We talk about the Venetian black nobility, which we'll be getting to in a upcoming video dissecting the top of the pyramid. And then we talk about what Mark Passio calls the dark occultists. And we talk about the otherworldly influence with people like David Icke, who say that they believe there is a interdimensional otherworldly influence that is involved in this. And Catherine Austin Fitts has some thoughts on that as well. And then we talk about the fact that some people believe that there is no capstone, that there's nobody or not one single group at the top of the pyramid. So this final episode is going to cover quite a bit, but right now we're going to focus on, I'm going to give you guys just a little preview of some of the things I touch on in the Freemason section here called the Freemasons Conspiracy. I'm not going to read the script to you because I don't want to give away what, is in the actual episode, but I do want to share some of it with you guys here. So first off, as with everything I cover in the Pyramid of Power, we start with what is the history of the Freemasons. And the Freemasons, there are some people who would say they goes back to biblical times. They trace it to the ancient mystery cults, Mithraic cults, things like that. But according to the most kind of commonly accepted view, the Masons can be traced somewhere between the 1500s to the 1700s. Some would even say the Rosicrucians, the 1600s. Again, I try to take what we can prove, and I'm sure some of you guys have your own views out there as well. What we know for certain, though, is that whether it was from biblical times or just the last 500 years, the Masons have grown, and there are now lodges all around the world. There are, just like any sort of movement or philosophy or religion, there are different sects and groups, and different. There's the Scottish Rite. There's different groups, right? It's not just Freemason as a whole, and that's also what I think makes things a little bit more complicated. But like the Jesuits and like the Jews, the Masons were suspected of all kinds of things, of overthrowing governments, of influencing and fighting against the church. And so there has been a historical anti-Mason trend. There was even an anti-Mason party in the United States, which came about in the 1820s. And there's many places that banned the Freemasons, just like people like to say, well, the Jews were kicked out of this many countries. Many of the Masons were kicked out of different countries, and so were the Jesuits as well. The anti-Mason party in the U.S., this is just some interesting history that I found here. It was actually sparked because there was a disappearance of a man named William Morgan, who was a Canadian bricklayer who actually wrote a book about the Masons called Illustrations of Masonry, which he released right before he was abducted and later murdered. Now, depending on the research that you find, I found different newspaper articles from back at that time. Some of them claim that he was murdered. Some of them claim that he was a suicide. And of course, many people believe that the Masons were involved in it. And there's actually a monument that you can find. I think it's in northern upstate New York, to William Morgan. It's in a really small town, and I want to go visit it at some point just because I think it's interesting history. And this murder, though, of this man, William Morgan, it inspired John Quincy Adams, who would become America's 6th president, to publish his own book in 1842 called Letters on the Masonic Institution. Let me go ahead and just open this link up here if I can. And in which John Quincy Adams, he also criticized the Masons, and he said that their secret oaths, and he questioned their loyalty, whether they were, loyal to each other or to the United States themselves. So I'll show you this. Again, John Quincy Adams, his book right here called, which you can find on archive.org, Letters on the Masonic Institution, John Quincy Adams, published in the 1800s in, what year was that? 1842. And then William Morgan, his book, Illustrations of Masonry, you can also still find it. Here it is, Illustrations of Masonry, on the fraternity who has devoted 30 years, by one of the fraternity who has devoted 30 years to the subject. So he used to be a member of it, he claimed, and he was trying to expose all their secrets. That book was published in 1826. So a lot of the Pyramid of Power is going back and looking at material that's 200 years old at this point. Like that book, in a couple of weeks, it'll be 200 years old. So that was sort of the beginning of the anti-Mason sentiment in the United States, and it continued to grow. Obviously, if you get an American president writing about it, that gives it pretty big weight. Now, it wasn't just in the United States, though, that there was anti-Mason sentiment. There was also anti-Mason sentiment in Mexico, in many countries, and this is largely because people suspect that the Masons were involved with influencing revolutions, civil wars, and this is because there were so many heads of state, including King Leopold I in Belgium, Pedro I of Brazil, William I in Germany, Maximilian I of Mexico, Wilhelm II in the Netherlands, and George VI of the UK, all of whom belonged to various Freemason lodges. And it is even said that at least 68 of the 200 plus founding fathers of the United States were Freemasons, including people who signed the Declaration of Independence. This includes George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, Paul Revere, among others. And then numerous U.S. presidents, including Washington, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, and many, many others. Even former President Bill Clinton, he was a member of the Masonic youth group. You didn't know this maybe, but the Masons have their own youth group called the Order of Des Moines. And although Bill Clinton has never been shown, as far as we know, to have been a member of the Freemasons as an adult, the fact that he was kind of in the children's group makes some people believe that he probably was and is secretly a Mason. And there's also this history that I found that as far back as 1798, George Washington, he was corresponding with a man named George W. Snyder, who was writing him letters and warning about the Masons influencing the United States. He sent him a book, which I talk about extensively in this chapter, and which I have on my shelf behind me, called Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All Religions and Governments of Europe, which was written by John Robison, who was a Scottish physicist and member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And John Robison, he believed that the French Revolution had been infiltrated by the Bavarian Illuminati, who had infiltrated various Freemason lodges. And so he was warning in that book about the Freemason lodges spreading around the world and trying to, overthrow governments and things like this. And of course, one thing that I think is important to understand at that time is because in the 1800s, religion was a much bigger deal than it is today. I know it's still a big deal to many of you out there, but at that time, it was, a fact of daily life. Like there was no way around religion at that point, whether you liked it or not. And so to speak against religions was still a heretical thing to do. And the Masons very much were secular, or some would argue they had their own religion where, they have the Grand Architect, or like in the French Revolution, the God of Reason, things like that. And so many of the church institutions like the Catholics and the Jesuits and other churches, they were fearful that the Freemasons were actually trying to overthrow religions. And as I get into in the documentary, I think there's some nuance there's some complexities, because again, for me, if I was existing at that time, I would be both against the church and the state, against the monarchy and the church. And so people might say, oh my God, this person's evil. He's trying to overthrow the king that was ordained by God, and he's speaking against religion. And we all know that, that's the one true path. And so the Masons took a lot of heat. That's not a defense of the Masons. It's just to say people were weary and afraid of them because they were openly speaking out about the control that the monarchy and the religions had on the world at the time. And so George Snyder sends George Washington a copy of Proofs of a Conspiracy, and basically warns him, saying like, I think that the Freemasons are trying to influence the United States. And they have some correspondence in there that I talk about that. But so a lot of people don't even know that America's first president was discussing and aware of the Illuminati and aware of the Freemasons. And I do talk about the Bavarian Illuminati here in the book, of course. Now, another area that I haven't seen too many people talk about that the Freemasons had a clear hand in is the annexation of Hawaii. And that is through something called a 13-member group known as the Citizens Committee of Public Safety, or simply the Committee of Safety, which is the people who planned this operation, planned this coup in Hawaii. On January 17th, 1893, they carried out a coup against the Hawaiian kingdom. The Queen ordered the troops to surrender. Within 48 hours, nations around the world recognized this provisional government. And within a couple years after that, the U.S. annexed Hawaii. And interestingly, the Queen of Hawaii at the time, she noted that this provisional government, which was established by this Committee of Safety, that they did not derive their power or their authority from the Hawaiian voters. The Hawaiian people themselves didn't vote for this. And in fact, she noted that this so-called Committee of Public Safety was, quote, composed largely of persons claiming American citizenship, and not one single Hawaiian was a member of this. And now I started to look at, well, who were the members of this so-called Committee of Public Safety? And you find out that at least half the group, which was, again, it was made up of 13 men, at least half of them were Freemasons. And I wouldn't be surprised if all of them were, but this was just what I could confirm by going through and looking up old lodge records. So Henry E. Cooper, who was the chairman of the committee, he was a Freemason in San Diego before he became a Freemason in the Hawaiian Lodge. Andrew Brown, John McCandless, these are names that probably don't mean much to you guys these days, and I didn't know who they were until I investigated this. But these men involved in this Hawaiian coup were all Freemasons. And then, as I mentioned, you can go back to Mexico, and you have several presidents, a very popular and powerful presidents of Mexico who are also Freemasons. And I went back and I found some old Spanish Mexican books discussing the influence of Freemasons in Mexico, in this battle between the Masons and the Catholic Church. Again, as I said, I think that there's some element there that we need to consider, that there was definitely a battle between people who were after secularizing society and people who were after trying to keep religion to be the dominant force in society. And so one of the presidents, Plutarco Elias Calles, he initiated what is called Calles Law, which enforced restrictions against the Catholic Church under Article 130 of the 1917 Mexican Constitution. This law enforced separation of church and state, requiring all churches to register with the government, and prohibited priests from holding political office. The enforcement of the law led to the Cristero War, which saw peasant Catholics resisting and revolting against the Mexican government for 3 years between 1926 and 1929. So that president comes in there, and of course, wouldn't you know it, he's a Freemason. So again, you kind of have this where the Freemasons are battling against the Catholic Church. Some would say the Jesuits themselves. And I found a book, a Spanish book called Cristero Mexico. And it said that during a Freemason banquet, another president, his name was Emilio Portes Gil, highlighted the Masonic influence on Mexico. And this is a quote that I hadn't seen anywhere else, and I translated it from Spanish. It may be in English for the first time ever. In Mexico, the state and Freemasonry in recent years have been one and the same thing, two entities that march side by side, because the men who in recent years have been in power have always known how to be in solidarity with the revolutionary principles of Freemasonry. And the book also says that that same president, the one who passed Calles Law, President Calles, was a 33rd degree Freemason, and that he was awarded the Masonic Merit Medal by the Supreme Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite as a reward for his campaign against Catholicism. So that's a little bit there. Of course, there were others who were talking about the Freemasons' involvement in the French Revolution, not just John Robison's Proof of a Conspiracy, but there was also a French journalist and priest, Augustin Borel, who wrote a book in 1797 called Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism, where he talked about the Jacobins and the Freemason lodges, and he believed that the Masons were subverting the Catholic Church through occult practices and Enlightenment ideals. And there's other references. You had this other Ernest Jouen, who was a Catholic priest who believed in a Judeo-Masonic conspiracy to attack Christianity and to try to control the world. This guy was writing in a journal called the International Review of Secret Societies. He had the support of numerous popes, including Pope Pius XI, who said that Ernest Jouen was combating the Catholic Church's, quote, mortal enemy by calling out Freemasons. And he eventually influenced another man who was called Leon de Ponsens, who in 1928 wrote another book called The Secret Powers Behind Revolution, Masonry and Judaism. And it goes on from there. And in that book, Secret Powers, Ponsens says that the Jewish people are uniquely fitted to this role of overthrowing traditions because they have an instinctive opposition to every established order. And so this is where you start to get into these ideas of the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy, right? And Ponsens, he was kind of drawing on another book written by a Catholic priest called Henry de Lossis. His book from 1910 was called The Anti-Christian Conspiracy, the Masonic Temple Seeking to Rise on the Ruins of the Catholic Church. And there's more here. I could keep going, but I don't want to give away everything from my documentary here. But I think that we've outlined quite a bit here. This is some of the reasons, and I gave you a lot of references there. That's one of the things I really love about the Pyramid of Power. The way that I've approached it is we give people lots of references. So if you're a nerd for this stuff and you want to go deeper, you're going to have a lot of material to dig into. You know, you've got John Robeson's, you got Ernest Jewin, you got Ponson's, you got I can't even remember the other people I already mentioned, but numerous books going back to 1820 talking about this alleged Freemason conspiracy. And of course, there's links to the Illuminati and things like that we're going to cover in this final chapter of the Pyramid of Power. So all of this will be in the show notes, except for my script. You'll have to wait for the final release to hear and see the full thing. And as I said, I'm hoping it's going to be coming out within the next week if everything goes well. I will put the other things in the show notes, including part 1, dissecting the top of the Pyramid of Power, the Jesuits, and then how to investigate conspiracies and secret societies with Richard Spence, because I think those are both invaluable resources. And we will be doing more parts of this as we go forward. We'll be looking at, of course, the Zionist Judeo conspiracy. We'll be looking at the Venetian black nobility and others like that. I highly encourage you guys to check it all out. So yeah, stay tuned for the final episode of the Pyramid of Power at thepyramidofpower.net.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.